Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Facebook Live video. I'm Andrew Ujifusa. I write the Politics K-12 blog for Education Week along with Allison Klein. And this is Liana Lois. She writes the Teacher Beat blog also for Education Week. And we are here to talk about taxes. Taxes. We are going to be talking about how the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act could impact education and educators. If you have any questions for us, you can put them into the comments section of the Facebook Live video that you're now watching. And we encourage you to share the video with your friends who might also be teachers or other folks who are involved in education. So the main thing to know about the tax bill that the Republicans in the House of Representatives have introduced almost a week ago is that it has a couple of aims. The Republicans want to cut taxes, no surprise there. But they also want to, they say, simplify the tax code. And in many cases, that means getting rid of a lot of deductions that have been around for some time. So we're going to get into that in a little bit. So I want to highlight a few things that are in the tax bill that are of interest to K-12 education. The first, maybe the most important one for many, is that the bill would end many state and local deductions that people take right now for their state and local taxes. That's potentially important because if people's federal tax burden goes up, that could mean more pressure on state and local governments to correspondingly reduce their taxes, and that could mean less money for public schools. In addition, the bill also expands the use of 529 college savings plans so that if people want to put money in there they could use for private school tuition, for example, they would be able to do that under the bill. And that would be a big win for Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos, who, as many of you know, is a big fan of private school choice. But the big thing that we're going to be talking about today is the end in the bill of the $250 deduction that teachers can now take for money they spend on classroom supplies. And I'm going to turn it over to Liana to talk a little bit about that.
Sure. The potential loss of this deduction is getting a lot of attention. We're seeing a lot of activity on social media around this, especially from teachers. Millions of teachers take this deduction every year. So what kinds of things can you take the $250 deduction for? It's up to $250. Pretty much anything you buy for your classroom that you're not being reimbursed for by your district. So paper, pens, pencils, if you want to make bulletin boards, things for that. If you want to get some supplementary materials, maybe workbooks that your district didn't get for you and you pay for those, you can do that. If you are going to professional development and you pay for it out of your pocket, you take a course, that can go toward your deduction. I taught for a while myself. I bought a lot of snacks for my kids. They came in hungry a lot. I used my deduction toward that. Prizes. I built a classroom library, got a classroom set of novels. You can use it for computer software, computer equipment. Really, just it's very broad what you're able to use it for.
Very versatile, yeah.
Yeah. So teachers. Almost all teachers will tell you they spend some money out of pocket during the school year. A recent Scholastic survey said it was around $530 on average for a teacher. And if you work in a high poverty district, it's much more. It's more like $670 a year. So teachers really are spending money on their classrooms, their own money. So this deduction is a little bit unusual in that it's what's known as an above the line deduction, which means you don't have to itemize to get it. So most teachers are not itemizing their taxes. They're not spending quite enough money to do that. So this just takes off of their taxable income. It's $250 less that you can be taxed on. It is not a credit. It's important to understand it's not just money back from the government. It's a deduction, not a credit. And teaching is just unusual in that there really aren't a lot of other professions where it's kind of understood you're going to spend your own money. So only a couple other professions, including like performance artists, are mentioned on the tax form and are able to take an above the line deduction. So it is kind of an interesting deduction, and the loss of it, as teachers are letting people know on social media, would be felt by a lot of people.
As you might expect, this is a relatively small provision in the tax bill in general and all the changes it would make to the tax code, but I think it might be helpful to get into the history a little bit of how this came about. It was became part of the tax code in 2002, and the lawmaker who successfully pushed for it was a name many of you might recognize, Senator Susan Collins of Maine. So I think that's interesting because, the Senate tax bill, which we're expecting relatively soon, it could handle this deduction differently than the way the House bill does. And if Susan Collins remembers introducing this deduction into the tax code, as she probably does, then she might fight to keep it in the Senate version. So it's a reminder that, we don't know how this is all going to shake out yet. There's a lot still to happen. Republicans want to get this done by the end of the year. We'll see if they're successful. So this was introduced into the tax code in 2002, and we do have a few numbers in terms of its impact. In 2015, the Internal Revenue Service said that this deduction was included on 3.7 million tax returns. So, in fact, that means almost certainly that more teachers than that, and principals and other people, claim the deduction. But because you might have a situation where two teachers are married to each other and they file jointly and they each claim a $250 deduction, that would only show up once on a tax return, but in fact, it's being claimed by two people. So there are probably more than 3.7 million individuals overall who would be claiming the tax deduction. And there's an estimate from the Tax Policy Center that for 2017, the value of the tax deduction in terms of the amount of tax revenue that would otherwise come into the federal government is about $210 million. So in the context of a tax overhaul that would impact billions and trillions of dollars, that's not a lot of money. And, for some teachers, I think Education Week Teacher did a poll, right, where it showed it's not generating sort of universal outrage in terms of its value to teachers, and not every teacher is saying that this is tremendously important to them financially, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. So the teachers' unions themselves are outraged and are really pushing back against this. I spoke to someone at NEA just yesterday who was saying, this just shows it's an indication of how out of whack the priorities in this bill are, and it really hurts families and communities, and it helps businesses. We've heard some Democrats note that the bill would not let teachers deduct paper, pencils, and pens from their taxes, but it would let corporations deduct that if they buy that for people who work for the corporation. So that's kind of interesting. When you look at the response from teachers, though, I mean, a lot of teachers are quite upset about this for a variety of reasons. People say, it made us feel we were acknowledged in the tax code. Just being able to check that box, made us feel acknowledged, and people recognizing what teachers do for the country. People said, I spend 4 times this, in my classroom every year. So this is kind of a drop in the bucket. So it's helpful, but it's not, it's a bit of a drop in the bucket. Then other teachers are saying, this tax bill overall would reduce my taxes much more than I get back on that $250 deduction. So who cares about that? Why are we even talking about that? So teachers' reactions have been somewhat more nuanced. In general, I'd say they've been pretty negative, but some people have an understanding that the tax bill is much bigger than that, and would do a lot of other things that might improve their tax situation.
To test how this might impact some teachers, we ran some numbers, and using the average salary of a teacher, which is $55,000, just over that, according to a congressional set of analysts, they estimated that someone with that income would see a tax cut of about $660 in a couple of years. And then that tax cut would go down relative to 2017, so that by 2027, the tax cut would only be $275 annually. So it's a tax cut, and it starts off big, or relatively big, but then it shrinks as time goes on. Now, of course, that leaves out so many factors, like whether that teacher is married, how many kids they have. But, running the numbers on just one teacher with that salary, it does show that they would get a small tax cut that would then decline over time. So, I think the deduction is driving interest in part because of the contrast between how that is treated versus how some corporate expenses are treated. And a lot of teachers think that's maybe offensive is not quite the right word, but troubling or disturbing.
You see a lot of that on social media. This is insulting. This is hurtful. This is mean. That's a lot of that's kind of coming out on social media. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think that it's important to remember that there are a lot of other things going on in Washington that impact teachers and funding for teachers specifically, and it's been kind of a tough year for that. In Congress, the House budget that was proposed for the fiscal year 2018, it gets rid of Title II entirely. That's about $2 billion that goes to teacher training, professional development, and keeps several thousand teachers, working. It supports their jobs. And there's also the Supreme Court case that the justices are going to hear in the not too distant future that will deal with whether or not unions can charge fees for teachers who are not members. Yeah. So there's a lot going on in Washington beyond even this tax bill, let alone the teacher tax deduction, that could impact teachers down the road, in sort of Trump's Washington. So I'm curious, do we have any Facebook questions? I don't think we have any.
I don't think so. We must have explained it really well, Andrew.
Yes, that's it. We must have just clarified everything for everybody.
Everyone understands everything.
We're
now,
glad all of you out there in Facebook Live land are satisfied. So I think we're going to leave it there. Again, we encourage you to share this video and rewatch it again if you'd like, if you need a refresher on some of the details.
We have a lot of content on the site as well right now. If you're looking for more details, we have an explainer. We have, as Andrew was talking about, we ran the analysis for a couple different, for teachers, an average teacher, a first-year teacher.
Yes.
You can take a look at that all on the EdWeek site.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.